Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Dragon Prince Yuan Season 2 episode number 9 based on novel. So let's start. Found you at last. Zhu Yuan gazed at the giant creature lying by the lakeside. The latter was drenched in blood, its aura rapidly weakening, clear signs that it had sustained life-threatening injuries. Xiao Qianxian is indeed rather capable. Zhu Yuan sighed. Someone incapable would not have been able to force a grade 4 wind thunder beast to such a pitiful state. However, no matter how capable the junior city lord was, the fruits of his labor were destined to be plucked by Zhu Yuan today. Zhu Yuan tightened his grip around the heavenly Yuan brush as it rapidly enlarged. There no hesitation whatsoever as he shot forward, heading straight for the gravely injured beast. Roar! The wind thunder beast immediately sensed the Genesis chi ripples and released a weak roar of anger. Its giant mouth opened as wind and lightning spewed out, viciously blasting towards Zhu Yuan. However, the wind thunder beast was heavily injured and had exhausted almost all of its Genesis chi, hence, it did not even have a tenth of its original power. Therefore, the wind and lightning attack was shattered with a single sweep from Zhu Yuan's brush. Upon seeing that the situation did not bode well for it, the wind thunder beast began to flee again. Where do you think you're going? Zhu Yuan laughed as the heavenly Yuan brush in his hand jerked. The snow-white brush hairs suddenly shot forth, becoming a white whip that wrapped around the wind thunder beast's claws. After binding it, the hairs began to frantically burrow into the wind thunder beast's body through its wounds. The wind thunder beast howled as wind and lightning began vibrating from its body. Unfortunately, it was unable to blast away the white hairs. Zhu Yuan leaped into the air, landing on the beast's head. There was no hesitation whatsoever, as green scales emerged on his fist and a punch was sent downwards. Dragon tablet hand, break the sky. A punch containing berserk Genesis chi slammed into the wind thunder beast's head, shattering it and extinguishing the beast's life. The wind thunder beast's enormous body powerlessly crashed to the ground, causing the surrounding area to shake and ripples to appear on the lake. Zhu Yuan kept the heavenly Yuan brush as his eyes began blazing with anticipation. As the wind thunder beast's life force faded, wisps of white mist began to rise from its body. Every wisp contained extremely pure Genesis chi. As expected of a grade 4 Genesis beast, the Genesis chi from it is so much more abundant than the beasts from before. Zhu Yuan sighed in praise. He had only gained a strand of Genesis chi from the Genesis beasts he had hunted previously. In comparison, there was more than 10 times the amount from the wind thunder beast. White mist continued to rise, ultimately gathering into a white ball the size of a human head. The ball of chi gradually began to shrink, transforming into a white bead that was the size of a fingernail. The bead seemed to contain a sea of clouds, and was very pretty. The vigorous Genesis chi that pulsed from it made Zhu Yuan's mouth water. Zhu Yuan wiped the corners of his mouth. He had the feeling that his chi dwelling would finally be fully filled after he absorbed the white Genesis bead. When that happened, he would be able to take that final step and ascend to the Heaven Gate stage. Zhu Yuan took in a deep breath, suppressing his surging excitement. He very carefully grabbed the white Genesis bead and kept it into his universe bag. After doing this, his eyes began to light up with excitement again, as he watched another wisp of white mist rise from the wind thunder beast's body and transform into a piece of green and black jade. Zhu Yuan's hand shot out like lightning, grabbing the jade as his eyes boiled with excitement. The moment he touched it, information began to flood into Zhu Yuan's head. Zhu Yuan closed his eyes to better digest the information, only opening them again a few seconds later, revealing a look of pure ecstasy. It was just as he had expected. A little Heaven Genesis technique was recorded in the jade. This little Heaven Genesis technique was called Great Wind and Thunder. The cultivation method could not be extracted, because it was a one-use item. Once used, the jade would shatter, making it impossible for a second person to learn the technique. Got it at last. A satisfied, Zhu Yuan kept the jade piece. He had finally obtained a little Heaven Genesis technique. If was able to learn it, his strength would increase by an astronomical amount. The haul this time is pretty good. Zhu Yuan could not help but chuckle to himself. He had not only obtained a white Genesis bead that could help him advance to the Heaven Gate stage, but also a little Heaven Genesis technique. While Zhu Yuan was figuring out how to deal with the wind thunder beast's corpse, the air suddenly trembled as the piercing sound of something fast rang out. A deadly force whizzed towards him from behind, heading straight for his head at a crafty angle. Zhu Yuan's response was not slow. The heavenly yuan brush jolted in his hand as its snow-white hairs transformed into countless white strings that weaved together behind him, forming multiple layers of white nets. A flash of scarlet red hit the white nets, forcibly plowing through layer by layer. However, it used up its energy a foot before reaching Zhu Yuan, transforming into a fiery red long spear as it was catapulted back. Zhu Yuan turned around, his eyes locking onto a certain mountain top nearby, where several figures were currently standing. The two in front were Xiao Qianxian and Ji Yuling. Can't believe they actually managed to chase the beast all the way here. Zhu Yuan was somewhat astonished by the sight of them. So you are the reason behind everything. Xiao Qianxuan's expression was exceptionally ugly, killing intent surging within his eyes as he darkly glared at Zhu Yuan. How could he not realize by now why such problems had occurred earlier? Zhu Yuan had definitely secretly done something that allowed that wind thunder beast to escape their encirclement. Besides Xiao Qianxian, Ji Yuling's face was not a pretty sight either as she laughed icily and said, "So it was you. What a good fisherman you are, patiently waiting for the beast and us to exhaust each other." Xiao Qianxuan's gaze was both icy and eerie as he stared at Zhu Yuan and said, "If not for the mysterious heavy mud that was left on the wind thunder beast, you may even have succeeded." He extended his hand at Zhu Yuan, his tone indifferent as he continued, "If you understand, hand over the things you obtained from the wind thunder beast, and the Jiyu clan's supreme treasure while you're at it. You don't deserve to enjoy any of these things." Zhu Yuan laughed when he heard this. He patted his universe bag, and the white Genesis bead appeared in his hand. "Are you talking about this?" Xiao Qianxian greedily stared at the white Genesis bead. Ordinary Genesis beasts only had a strand of pure Genesis chi in their bodies, while the wind thunder beast's Genesis chi had accumulated into a bead. From this, one could see how much more Genesis chi the latter had. "Hand it over." Zhu Yuan rolled the white bead between his fingers, as he revealed a strange smile to Xiao Qianxian. In the end, with a gentle flick, the white Genesis bead was thrown into his mouth and swallowed in a single gulp. Zhu Yuan grinned from ear to ear as he said, "Won't I be able to enjoy it now?" Xiao Qianxian was stunned. A split second later, a twisted expression abruptly rose on his face. He roared, "Zhu Yuan! I'm going to kill you." He had used up so many trump cards in order to exhaust the wind thunder beast. Who could have imagined that it would end up benefiting Zhu Yuan? "Kill him!" howled Xiao Qianxian. Behind him, several advanced Heaven Gate stage prided geniuses looked at Zhu Yuan with hostility. However, Zhu Yuan ignored them. He did a backflip, disappearing into the lake as a faint voice echoed, "Xiao Qianxian, we will settle this debt when I reach the Heaven Gate stage." This was not the time to fight. After swallowing the Genesis bead, he needed to find a place to absorb the energy and advance to the next level. Xiao Qianxian and Gang swiftly arrived at the lakeside, diving in head first. However, they soon emerged again with grim expressions. Ji Yuling gnashed her teeth. "There are too many tunnels in the lake, we can't possibly tell which one he took." Xiao Qianxian was shaking with anger. It was a long time later before he finally suppressed the rage in his heart and declared in a chillingly eerie voice, "He can't have run very far. Search this place inch by inch. When we find him, I will make sure he begs for death." Murder overflowed from his voice. In a certain cave deep within the mountains, Zhu Yuan was seated on a rock, his eyes lightly shut. The white Genesis bead he had swallowed previously had already landed in his chi dwelling and was currently giving off a seemingly endless stream of Genesis chi that was ultimately refined by the omnipython chi. Zhu Yuan could feel the Genesis chi in his chi dwelling growing more and more abundant. "It should be about time for a breakthrough," mumbled Zhu Yuan to himself. He opened his eyes and cast a glance at the cave entrance, which he had blocked with a giant rock. In addition, he had inscribed several Genesis runes on it that could conceal Genesis chi undulations. He believed that this was enough to ensure his safety. There was no way that Xiao Qianxian would let this matter rest, and he would definitely lead a search in the mountains. However, there were many mountains in the area and together with the concealing Genesis runes, Xiao Qianxian should not be able to locate him. Zhu Yuan let out an icy chuckle. Without any further hesitation, he closed his eyes again and turned his attention towards his chi dwelling, controlling the omnipython chi to devour every strand of pure Genesis chi. The surging Genesis chi around him began to rise steadily. Meanwhile, at another location in the same mountains. Xiao Qianxian gazed at the vast mountain range before him, his expression white with anger. They had spent a good part of the day searching, only to end up with no results. It was as if Zhu Yuan had vanished into thin air. Bastard! Cracking sounds emerged from Xiao Qianxuan's fists, the rage in his heart on the verge of making him turn crazy. This was the first time he had been toyed with in such a manner, and it was even by a qi-nourishing stage trash. No need to worry, he cannot hide for long. Ji Yuling consoled from the side. A vicious look flashed in her eyes as she said, "We can spread the news that Zhu Yuan has obtained a little heaven genesis technique. He is merely at the qi-nourishing stage, and I'm sure that many people will soon become interested in him." Xiao Qianxian suppressed his anger, his eyes narrowing slightly. In the end, he nodded his head. "All right. Since he dares to snatch away what's mine, I will let him become the focus of everyone's attention, and ensure he will no longer have any peace. Besides this, I want to issue a bounty. Anyone that kills Zhu Yuan will be rewarded 3 million Genesis crystals." A savage smile was revealed on Xiao Qianxuan's face. Once Zhu Yuan dared to reveal himself, he will be plagued with an endless amount of trouble. Ji Yuling nodded with a slight smile. She lifted her gaze and looked towards the depths of the mountains. Zhu Yuan might think that playing fisherman was fun, but little did he know how much trouble was waiting for him once the fisherman was exposed. If he wanted to blame someone, he should blame his own lack of strength. So weak and yet still daring to seize a little heaven genesis technique. While the two were conversing, they suddenly sensed a strange disturbance from high up in the sky. They immediately lifted their heads in astonishment, only to discover thousands of light rays converging in the sky high above them, transforming into an enormous stone tablet. "What is that?" Xiao Qianxian involuntarily cried out. The stone tablet seemed to be extremely far away, but when they looked at it with their eyes, it was clearly visible. It was a magical feeling. Ji Yuling also stared in astonishment at the stone tablet that had suddenly appeared in the sky. At closer observation, she remarked, "There seems to be some words on the stone tablet." Xiao Qianxian also focused. Sure enough, he saw several ancient-looking words. Those that can leave their names on the tablet will be allowed to enter the sacred grounds. At the top of the tablet were 3 words, "Distinguished Battle Achievements." Xiao Qianxuan's heart shook violently, his eyes suddenly turning incomparably hot. Sacred grounds. I once heard Father mention a certain area that exists within the Saint Remains domain called the Sacred Grounds. It is there that the greatest gift of the Saint Remains domain is hidden. But it has never appeared before. Why has it appeared now? Ji Yuling covered her red lips in shock. Ji Yuling could not help but mumble, "Those that can leave their names on the tablet, what does this mean? How would one leave one's name?" Xiao Qianxian pondered for a while, before he slowly said, "If I'm not wrong, it should refer to the Distinguished Battle Achievements." Distinguished Battle Achievements. Ji Yuling frowned. Xiao Qianxian nodded. The Saint Remains domain originated from the blood of a saint and is filled with mysteries and wonder. The Saint Tablet that has appeared should be able to sense everything that happens in the entire Saint Remains domain. Which is to say, only those whom the Saint Tablet judges to have distinguishable battle achievements will have the right to have their names on the tablet and be allowed into the sacred grounds. The gazes of the other prided geniuses besides Xiao Qianxian also began to burn with excitement. The sacred grounds contained the greatest gift. If they could enter and obtain it, it would be akin to soaring straight into the heavens. "It seems that we'll have to find out what is considered a distinguished battle achievement," mumbled Xiao Qianxian. However, a vicious look soon appeared in his eyes. "But before that, we should first focus on dealing with Zhu Yuan." Practically every individual in the entire Saint Remains domain had sensed the appearance of the Saint Tablet in the sky high above them, causing them to raise their heads. The ancient words on the stone tablet was likewise clearly seen by everyone. The entire Saint Remains domain began to boil with excitement, the eyes of countless prided geniuses burning with anticipation. All of them clearly understood what it meant to enter the sacred grounds. Only there would the greatest gift be found. Therefore, countless prided geniuses began to rack their brains. How distinguished did the so-called battle achievements had to be? At a certain area of the Saint Remains domain, beside a clear stream, a figure with matchless looks was currently extending her bare feet into the stream, gently dipping into its cool waters, her pretty eyes shut in enjoyment. This familiar appearance, who else could it be but Yao Yao? At this current moment, Her long black hair was hanging down over her back, reaching her slender waist. She enjoyed the cool waters for a while, before unhurriedly raising her head and gazing at the saint tablet in the sky above. Distinguished battle achievements. Yao Yao lazily stretched her back, as she mumbled to herself, I wonder how Zhu Yuan is doing. Hope that he hasn't ended up stuck somewhere again, after offending someone. Soon after, she lightly shook her head. Shan't think about him first, and deal with my own matters. Her slender body rose, clothes whiter than snow appearing as her features turned to a mix of pretty and handsome again. It was truly the perfect pretty boy young master. However, a certain iciness was currently gathering in the mysterious and aloof eyes of the pretty boy young master. Bright rays appeared on her clean, clear forehead, as an incomparably powerful spirit ripple slowly pulsed outwards. The stream below her feet seemed to become extremely silent at this moment, the little waves within seeming to bow down while cowering. Yao Yao slowly turned around as she looked towards the sky nearby where scarlet-red chi was streaking across the horizon in a dignified and domineering manner. Yao Yao icily gazed at the scarlet-red chi. A finger suddenly extended and gently pointed in the air. An invisible spirit ripple suddenly exploded, transforming into a berserk wave of spirit energy that blasted at the scarlet-red chi. The sky seemed to shudder for a moment, before the scarlet-red chi descended from the sky, ultimately landing on a mountain top near the stream. The scarlet-red chi slowly receded, revealing a figure in golden robes. It was Wu Huang. Wu Huang was expressionless as he lowered his head. His pupils tightened slightly as he looked towards Yao Yao and slowly said, Why did you stop me? Yao Yao stared at Wu Huang, the iciness in her pupils more than enough to freeze the entire stream. Don't you like causing troubles now? Let me cause some trouble for you. Yao Yao's voice was clear, without the slightest hint of any emotion. She thought for a while, before she continued, at the same time, I also want to know if defeating you will count as a distinguished battle achievement. The moment her words faded, her long sleeves trembled faintly as scroll after scroll appeared in front of her, astonishing Genesis chi slowly spreading from each one. Have you heard? That kid Zhu Yuan actually managed to snatch away a little heaven Genesis technique from the hands of Xiao Tianxian and his squad. That can't be, right? Isn't Zhu Yuan only at the chi nourishing stage? I heard that he took advantage of the moment when Xiao Tianxuan's group and the grade 4 Genesis beast exhausted each other. TCH, what great luck. That's a little heaven Genesis technique. Hey, Xiao Tianxian has promised 3 million Genesis crystals to anyone who can catch Zhu Yuan. Many have already went to the area he was last seen in hopes of capturing him, taking the little heaven Genesis technique, and then the bounty on his head. What a case of treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. He's so weak and yet he still dares to have designs on a little heaven Genesis technique. That's practically courting death. Shall we go and try our luck too? If we somehow meet him, it will be akin to striking lottery. Hee, that's exactly what I had in mind. He's only at the chi nourishing stage. It should be easy to deal with him if we encounter him. Quick then, let's go. Xiao Tianxian stood with his hands behind his back on a certain mountain top. As he gazed at the figures that seemingly covered the sky and land as they searched for a particular individual, a chillingly eerie look emerged in his eyes. He is really good at hiding. Xiao Tianxian frostily said. He had done as Ji Yuling suggested, and sure enough, many individuals had been drawn over to search for any traces of Zhu Yuan. Although there was a lot of activity, they were still unable to find Zhu Yuan. No need to be anxious. Zhu Yuan is definitely still in the area. Ji Yuling consoled from behind. Her long and narrow eyes stared at the vast mountain forests like a viper as she said, he is now merely a rat that has already been caught in our net. As long as we continue to tighten the net, he will eventually appear. When that happens, his chi nourishing stage strength will not be able to save him from death. Xiao Tianxian nodded, before forcefully expelling a long breath of air as he wanted to get rid of all the resentment he had towards Zhu Yuan. His path had been smooth sailing for many years, and his status as the junior city lord of Saint Remain's city made it such that praise and compliance were all he would meet wherever he went. He never imagined that he would actually succumb to a ploy from a chi nourishing stage kid. No matter what, he would not take this lying down. Ji Yuling softly said, Come on, a rat is not worth getting angry over. How can such a person compare to you? Even when you discount your status, you're still someone who has already stepped into the realm of the advanced Heaven Gate stage, and is even an elite amongst those of the same cultivation level. Besides those few individuals, who else amongst the entire younger generation of the Kangmang continent can match you? Xiao Qianxian let out a bitter laugh. If not because I used up too many trump cards to deal with the Wind Thunder Beast, I would not even fear those few super elites. There would be no deficient if he had been able to kill the Wind Thunder Beast with those trump cards, and he would have even grown his reputation, unfortunately. While Xiao Qianxian and Ji Yuling were talking, they suddenly detected a disturbance from the mountains some distance away. They immediately exchanged a look, seeing the joy that was surging out in each other's eyes. Was it that little rat? Their figures abruptly shot forth, landing on a giant tree several minutes later, as their gazes looked to the front where several figures could be seen. These figures had surrounded a certain location, a faintly visible cave that had been blocked with a boulder. So he's been using Genesis runes to conceal any Genesis chi undulations. No wonder we couldn't find him. Xiao Qianxuan's gaze swept across the cave, sensing the faint Genesis rune undulations from behind the boulder as he icily chuckled. The rat is hiding inside. Break the boulder. Whoever brings him out will be rewarded 3 million Genesis crystals. Xiao Qianxuan's chilling voice echoed across the area. The eyes of several figures brightened. 3 million Genesis crystals was no small sum. Heh, to think that a little chi-nourishing rat would be worth such a fortune. I'll be glad to take it. Voices rang out one after another. A dozen figures swiftly shot forward, streams of powerful Genesis chi lashing at the boulder blocking the cave entrance. Boom. The entire mountain seemed to shake as the boulder was destroyed. Charge. The dozen figures had already begun dashing towards the cave as rock fragments shot outwards, each clearly intent on being the first to reach the target so as not to lose to the others. Xiao Qianxian smiled indifferently as he watched the dozen figures charge towards the cave. All of them had the strength of the Heaven Gate stage. There was no way Zhu Yuan would be able to escape. Boom. However, while Xiao Qianxian was waiting for Zhu Yuan to be dragged out, an astonishing Genesis chi ripple suddenly pulsed from the cave like an erupting volcano. The Genesis chi ripple was tyrannically domineering, causing cracks to form on the cave. When the astonishing Genesis chi erupted, everyone also saw the dozen figures that had just moments ago been menacingly charging into the cave, being flung out from the cave. They tumbled on the ground like bottle gourds, bumping against the ground till their faces were a bloody mess. What's going on? Xiao Qianxuan's pupils shrank. One of the figures that had been sent flying replied in a horrified voice, He has ascended to the Heaven Gate stage. This caused even more frowns of confusion. Even if Zhu Yuan had ascended to the Heaven Gate stage, he would merely be at the initial level. However, the pulse of Genesis chi earlier did not seem to be that of an initial Heaven Gate stage practitioner. While many were still puzzled, the Genesis chi undulations from the cave grew more and more berserk as the entire mountain began to tremble. Rumble. Genesis chi crazily converged towards the cave until a certain moment, when it pierced through the walls of the mountain and dashed straight into the heavens. Everyone watched as a dozen-feet-wide pillar of dark gold Genesis chi soared into the sky, rapidly rising feet by feet. He has indeed ascended to the Heaven Gate stage. Xiao Qianxuan's voice was filled with iciness. Ji Yuling coldly snorted. The phenomenon of chi dashing through the Heaven Gate is measured in feet. Do you recall how many feet your Genesis chi reached when you reached the Heaven Gate stage? Xiao Qianxian indifferently answered, only 94 feet. His tone was normal, but clearly contained a faint trace of pride. Such an accomplishment was after all already top tier amongst those of the same generation. A smile surfaced from the corners of Ji Yuling's ruddy little mouth. The Genesis chi of ordinary individuals usually reached about 20 feet when they advanced to the Heaven Gate stage. Your 94 feet has already surpassed the great majority. Xiao Qianxian sighed. So what? I heard that when Wu Huang's chi dashed past the Heaven Gate, his seemingly endless Genesis chi soared straight into the sky, reaching a height of 238 feet. Ji Yuling also sighed when she heard this. It's rumored that Wu Huang has a gold chi dwelling. Achieving such a feat is not strange at all. Her eyes seemed to swivel, a hint of mockery in her gaze, as she looked towards the slowly rising dark gold Genesis chi from the mountain top before them. This kid has hidden for so long, believing that he will be able to turn the situation around once he reaches the Heaven Gate stage. I'm really interested to find out how many feet his Genesis chi will rise to. Xiao Qianxian laughed inside, no longer anxious for the time being. He intended to patiently wait till Zhu Yuan fully ascended, when the latter was full of confidence, to thoroughly beat him into the ground, a defeat so complete that it would leave a shadow in his heart that would be almost impossible to break free of. Xiao Qianxian placed one hand behind his back, a toying look in his eyes as he looked to his front. The gaze of everyone in the area converged on this very spot. Hence, under the attention of numerous gazes, the dark gold Genesis Chi that was still shooting out of the cave rose feet by feet at a steady pace. Every gaze in the area was raised towards sky where a dark golden pillar of Genesis Chi was rising into the heavens. This scene was not unfamiliar to everyone present. The same thing had also happened to them when they reached the Heaven Gate stage. It was known as Chi dashing through the Heaven Gate, and was measured in feet. Simply put, the higher one's Chi rose, the more abundant one's Genesis Chi was. Of course, there were also various other factors, such as the grade of the Genesis Chi, the grade of the Chi dwelling. It was not always the case that the higher one's Genesis Chi rose, the stronger one would be in the future. But at the very least, for a certain period in one's cultivation, the higher one's Genesis Chi soared, the bigger the lead one would have over others. In a certain sense, this achievement represented one's foundations. The sturdier and stronger one's foundations, the greater the heights one's Genesis Chi would reach when dashing past the Heaven Gate. That kid has really ascended to the Heaven Gate stage. Already over 40 feet, that's not bad at all. But it seems to be rising still. It will very likely approach its limit soon. Amongst the numerous whispers, the dark gold Genesis Chi pillar continued its unhurried ascent. A dozen breaths later, the whispers began to fade as everyone's expressions changed slightly. The dark gold Genesis Chi pillar had unknowingly reached a height of over 70 feet. Such a height had already surpassed many of those present. He does have some ability. Ji Yuling's pretty face had turned slightly cold. Back when she had advanced to the Heaven Gate stage, her Genesis Chi had only reached slightly over 70 feet. Zhu Yuan's result was already comparable to her own. Xiao Qianxian did not remark, the expression in his eyes fluctuating indeterminately as he stared at the dark gold pillar. A faint sense of unease rose within him. He had discovered that even till now, the dark gold Chi pillar was still very concentrated and showed no signs of waning. In other words, Zhu Yuan still had a substantial amount of reserves. It was indeed as he had expected. The rate at which the dark gold Chi pillar climbed did not drop, but instead began to increase. An uproar washed over the mountains, gaze after gaze filled with astonishment. After another 10 breaths, the rising dark gold Chi pillar broke past the 90 feet mark, directly reaching 100 feet under Xiao Qianxuan's ashen complexion. Numerous faces began to be colored by emotion. 100 feet. This result was able to match the top-tier geniuses. Did Zhu Yuan really have such talent and potential? One of the onlookers wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead as he muttered, "It's already reached 100 feet, it should be over now, right?" However, the dark gold Chi pillar seemed to have heard this individual's words. The moment it reached 100 feet, its speed suddenly began to rise rapidly. The previous foot-by-foot progress had now turned into a 10 feet by 10 feet dash. Wave after wave of noise pulsed across the mountains as if unable to stop. Xiao Qianxuan's and Ji Yuling's expressions grew uglier and uglier. 130 feet, 150 feet, 200 feet. In the short span of a dozen breaths, the dark gold Chi pillar had already reached 200 feet. The place had become very silent, disbelief on everyone's faces. Still not stopping. A trembling voice rang out, the owner looking at the Chi pillar as if it was a monster. The number of individuals whose Chi could reach 200 feet in the Kangmang continent could be counted on one hand. The names of every one of these geniuses was well known in the Kangmang continent. Trembling gaze after gaze watched the dark gold Chi pillar continue its climb. In the end, it gradually reached its limit, stopping at a whopping height of 484 feet. 484 feet. The entire mountain range was dead silent. Cold sweat had appeared on everyone's foreheads. They never heard of anyone who had ever been able to reach this height. Just how much Genesis Chi was required to achieve this? One must know that even some of the advanced Heaven Gate experts present may not be able to achieve such a feat yet. Zhu Yuan had done it moments after reaching the Heaven Gate stage. Which is to say, the amount of Genesis Chi he had at the initial Heaven Gate stage was not any less than an advanced Heaven Gate stage expert. How had Zhu Yuan done it? Within the silence, Xiao Qianxuan's expression was already extremely ugly. Zhu Yuan had never been able to enter the former's eyes, and had all along only been akin to a troublesome rat. Yet, the little rat had now clearly shown Xiao Qianxian just how huge a gap there was between their potentials. After all, even Wu Huang's greatness would be thoroughly suppressed by the result of 484 feet. Ji Yuling's teeth were tightly clenched. Zhu Yuan dominance was clearly not something she wished to see. Even so, her heart still trembled faintly. From the scene before her eyes, she knew that Zhu Yuan's future was definitely limitless. His talent was not to be underestimated. Beside Ji Yuling, Xiao Qianxian suddenly icily said, "He must die." The intense killing intent within his voice made even Ji Yuling shiver for a moment. She turned her head and saw that Xiao Qianxuan's expression was calm and collected. However, Ji Yuling could also clearly see the fear that had flitted across his eyes, fear that was soon replaced by ruthlessness. Previously, Xiao Qianxian had merely viewed Zhu Yuan as a rat, but now, the former was beginning to feel threatened, very deeply threatened. Genesis Qi that reached 484 feet, at the Heaven Gate stage already spoke volumes about his sturdy foundations and talent. Such a person would definitely accomplish amazing things in the future if all went well. However, for Xiao Qianxian and Saint Remain's city, this person would become a huge threat. Since the grudge had already been made, he had to make sure cleanly cut off such a threat. Whoever kills Zhu Yuan will be awarded 5 million Genesis crystals. Xiao Qianxuan's deep voice slowly echoed. The eyes of numerous individuals in the area began to fill with greed. 5 million Genesis crystals was no small sum. It seems that Xiao Qianxuan's killing intent towards Zhu Yuan had already reached its peak. However, although many were tempted, some of the smarter individuals present decisively decided to withdraw from the area after some thought, clearly no longer planning on interfering in the grudge between Xiao Qianxian and Zhu Yuan. The previous Zhu Yuan was merely a qi-nourishing small fry, hence why they did not mind eliminating the former for Xiao Qianxian. However, the situation was now different. Zhu Yuan had broken through to the Heaven Gate stage, and had displayed his extremely terrifying potential. The small fry had turned into a huge whale all of a sudden. It was naturally fine if such a person was killed here, but if he were to escape and allowed to grow, his revenge would surely be catastrophic. Those present were elites amongst their generations, and there were few fools amongst them. After some considerations, everyone naturally made their decision. Xiao Qianxuan's face twitched faintly as he watched several people withdraw. Soon after, the murder in his eyes intensified. There were still quite a number of people left in the area, but none of them acted rashly, choosing instead to cautiously observe for the time being. It was at this moment that a clear whistle rang out in the mountains. As the whistle dashed into the sky, the mountain top crumbled, a figure shooting out before slowly landing on the ground. He landed on the ruins of the mountain top, opened his mouth and violently inhaled. The pillar of dark gold Genesis Qi that had reached 484 feet rapidly shrunk, and was eventually swallowed into the figure's stomach. Rumble. Powerful Genesis Qi undulations began to pulse from the figure's body, his aura surging as the air around him trembled. Clothes flapping wildly, the young figure turned around and looked in Xiao Qianxuan's direction. The revealed face naturally belonged to Zhu Yuan. He stared at Xiao Qianxian, a smile seemingly appearing on his face. 5 million Genesis crystals is truly a huge sum, even I am a little tempted to hand my head over to you. His 5 fingers slowly closed into a fist as he paused. However, before thinking about that, I believe that it is time for us to settle our debt atop the mountain peak. Zhu Yuan's clothes fluttered, his eyes suffused with a sliver of iciness, as he stared at Xiao Qianxian some distance away. Not only had the latter caused him to pay extra in the auction for no good reason, Xiao Qianxian had even placed a bounty on Zhu Yuan, causing him no small amount of trouble. It was now finally time for these debts to be cleared. Xiao Qianxian did not seem to mind Zhu Yuan's icy gaze, instead, mockery appeared on the former's face as he coldly said, "What bold words. Do you truly believe that advancing to the Heaven Gate stage makes you invincible? Who here is not also at the Heaven Gate stage? Moreover, so what if your Genesis Qi can reach over 400 feet? At the end of the day, you are merely an initial Heaven Gate practitioner." His gaze turned towards the numerous restless individuals in the area, as he continued to speak. "My bounty I previously placed on his head is still valid. Whoever can take his life will be awarded 5 million Genesis crystals." Those that stayed were clearly aiming for the bounty. 5 million was no small sum after all, and was more than enough to buy the cultivation resources they needed. Hence, Several gazes filled with ill intent began to turn towards Zhu Yuan. It was just as Xiao Tianxian had said. Zhu Yuan's feat of reaching over 400 feet was indeed stunning, and was more than a testament to his solid foundations. When all was said and done, however, he was still only an initial Heaven Gate stage practitioner. Turning their Genesis Chi into a pillar that was over 400 feet tall was something that several of the advanced Heaven Gate stage practitioners present were also capable of. The current Zhu Yuan was merely an initial Heaven Gate stage practitioner. Although he was one cultivation level higher, this did not make much of a difference to the advanced Heaven Gate stage practitioners present. Therefore, it was not long before a bald man walked out. He had a fierce-looking face while cruelness flickered in his eyes. He displayed a savage smile to Zhu Yuan as he said, "I've butchered quite a few geniuses, but it's my first time dealing with someone like you." Boom. Vigorous Genesis Chi exploded from his body, revealing that he was an advanced Heaven Gate stage expert. Bang. His body lowered slightly and his foot powerfully slammed into the ground, causing it to crack as his figure was sent shooting forward like a cannonball, charging straight at Zhu Yuan. Mid-grade black Genesis technique, Metal Devil Head. The bald man's shout was akin to thunder. One could only watch in surprise as he used his head as a weapon, Genesis Chi surging over it as the smooth head took on a gleaming metallic black luster. The terrifying charge blasted away the surrounding air, an attack that was forceful and unyielding to the limit. The bald man's attack looked rather comical, but its ferocity still made the expressions of several people present change slightly. Surprise flitted across Zhu Yuan's eyes as he watched the black figure ferociously charge towards him. Every individual specialized in a different kind of offense, while this person's most deadly weapon was his gleaming bald head. If it was before breaking through to the Heaven Gate stage, I would have to be a little more cautious about this headbutt. Zhu Yuan softly chuckled. He did not move to avoid the attack, merely slowly closing his 5 fingers into a fist as tiny scales emerged on the back of his hand, scales that appeared golden. In a few breaths, a layer of gold python scales had appeared on Zhu Yuan's hand. They were the magical python scales. As Zhu Yuan advanced to the Heaven Gate stage, the scales also evolved, turning from the green of the first level to the gold second level. Color was not the only change, the scales had also clearly grown much stronger. Zhu Yuan tightened his fist as he stepped forward, sending a punch at the incoming black head, the two forces violently clashing together. Clang! A loud clang rang out at the moment of impact, before a shockwave that could be seen with the naked eye swept outwards, causing crack after crack to grow from under Zhu Yuan's feet. Bang! A split second after these cracks appeared, everyone watched as Zhu Yuan's fist continued forward, sending the bald man's body flying backwards even quicker than he had arrived with a miserable cry. Blood flowed from the bald man's head as his body was sent flying into the forest, smashing through several giant trees before slowly coming to a stop. His figure was only visible for a brief moment before being buried by numerous broken trees. No one knew whether he was dead or alive. Silence, complete silence. Everyone blankly watched this scene as they swallowed a mouthful of saliva. No one had expected that the ferocious headbutt charge of the bald man would end up with him being sent flying with a single punch from Zhu Yuan. The bald man had put his everything into that attack, not to mention that he was also an advanced Heaven Gate expert. The might of his earlier blow was so great that those of the same cultivation level had no choice but to avoid it. But why had he been sent flying by a single punch from Zhu Yuan? Gaze after gaze stared at Zhu Yuan in a strange manner. Although the latter had just ascended to the Heaven Gate stage, the power he possessed was clearly extremely astonishing. Under numerous shocked gazes, Zhu Yuan lowered his head in surprise and looked at his gold scale-covered fist. The power of the earlier punch had likewise also exceeded his expectations. Is this the effect of the gold magical python scales? Zhu Yuan quickly understood as amazement flitted across his eyes. It turned out that the second level of the magical python scales could not only form a defensive layer to protect him, but also amplify his strength and power. According to Zhu Yuan's estimate, the places where the gold scales appeared would multiply the power released from there. Zhu Yuan laughed. He looked towards the crowd that had been awed by his punch and said, "Is there anyone else who wants the bounty? If so, please hurry up." Everyone looked to each other, bitterly shaking their heads in the end as they began to withdraw. Zhu Yuan's earlier punch had already made clear his strength. It was not known whether the advanced Heaven Gate bald man was dead or alive after receiving a single punch, and most of them were at best only equal in strength to the latter. If they stubbornly chose not to back off, they would likely end up with the same fate as the bald man. Therefore, although Genesis crystals were valuable, they were not worth one's own life. Given the current situation, people like them could no longer interfere. Zhu Yuan nodded his head in satisfaction when he saw them withdraw. He could not be bothered with these people, and they would only waste his energy. Hence, his gaze turned towards Xiao Tianxian. The latter's expression was currently extremely ugly, clearly surprised that the bald man did not cause even a single injury to Zhu Yuan. Instead, the bald man had even become an example for others, making them too intimidated to interfere any longer. Xiao Tianxian took in a deep breath, his grim expression gradually returning to an expressionless one. He stared at Zhu Yuan, killing intent flooding out in his eyes as his hand slowly closed around the fiery red long spear that appeared within it. Powerful Genesis chi erupted from his body like a storm, shaking the surrounding space. An overwhelming pressure enveloped the area. The numerous gazes in the vicinity looked towards him in respect. Xiao Tianxuan's strength was clearly a different level than ordinary advanced Heaven Gate experts. The spear in his hand was slowly raised, pointing towards Zhu Yuan as an icy voice sounded across the mountain. I originally wanted to save myself the trouble, but it seems that I have to do this personally. Well, guess I'll save myself 5 million Genesis crystals. The numerous figures on the mountain began to back away, their gazes filled with searing anticipation as they looked towards Xiao Tianxian. Was the junior city lord of Saint Remains City finally going to fight? This video will end here.